Hello, everyone. Good morning or good afternoon, and thank you for joining us. This is Erica. I'm part of the marketing team here at DataStax, and I'll be your moderator for today's webinar. We are very excited to have our two speakers here today. We have Mike Downey, Senior Developer from Expero, a graph partner of ours, and Garrett Coons on the product marketing team here at DataStax. So before we get started, I want to remind everyone that at any time, feel free to type in your questions or comments in the questions box in the WebEx panel to your right, and we'll try to address as many as we can during the Q&A session at the end of the webinar. And lastly, before I pass it over to Mike, this webinar will be recorded, and you should receive an email with access to the replay and slides by tomorrow. So with that, over to you, Mike.
Thank you, Erica. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining today's webinar. Today, we're going to talk about what is Customer 360. We're also going to speak directly to why Graph has significant benefits for Customer 360 applications, and again, some specific details of how DSE Graph can benefit Customer 360 applications. For those of you who may not be familiar with Expero's work, I'm going to give you a brief introduction. Expero is a software-focused firm that has expertise in three separate areas: product discovery, user experience research and design, and software architecture and development. What we found is that all successful software projects need work in all three of these areas. We can help in one or all of them. The company was founded in 2001. We currently have offices in Austin and Houston, with some staff working remotely from outside those areas. While our primary locations are in Texas, we do business with customers all around the country. We work with a number of business leaders and innovators across multiple industries. This slide shows some of the more well-known names of folks we're working with currently or have worked with in the recent past. With some clients, our work is isolated to one of the focus areas, either user experience or maybe development architecture, but we work with many of our clients across multiple focus areas. We found that Expero's expertise helps bring efficiency and consistency across a customer's product discovery, user experience efforts, and product implementation. One technology that spans all of Expero's focus areas is Graph. We at Expero have become adept at answering the question, do you have a Graph problem? And if Graph is a good fit, we have established practices and toolkits that we've found are very helpful in helping customers develop proof of concepts or demos in a very timely fashion. Our customers have said that taking advantage of Expero's expertise in modeling, implementation, and user experience design for Graph, or taking of some of the training offerings that Expero offers, has helped customers meet business objectives within their budgets. Expero experts have also shared their knowledge through numerous talks and publications. This slide contains a list of recent references, and I encourage you to check it out when you receive the slides tomorrow. There's also some upcoming events in May and June where Expero staff will be presenting, and encourage you to check those out if you have the opportunity. As the slide says here, that DataStax and Expero have been working together since 2015, especially with Graph technologies. Expero was a part of some of the early implementation and sales of DSE Graph. One of the things that Expero can bring to the table is some visualization work, and there's a link here to our Graph gallery that shows different examples of how Graph has been implemented across different industries. I encourage you to also check that out. What we found as we speak with customers is that there's a great desire to understand all the different touch points that a company may have with their customers. If you look at touch points in isolation, then there's a very low chance of being able to develop an accurate picture of how your customers see your business. But when you take a cross-section of all the different touch points, research has shown that the accuracy with which you understand your customers increases tremendously. That's one of the great benefits of creating that Customer 360, that full view of your customer interactions. Many Customer 360 applications have siloed information where you have multiple data sources that are all working together to create that picture of information. And now I'm going to hand it off to Gary to talk a little bit more about how Expero and DataStax work together.
So Customer 360 is all about understanding your customer in today's cloud app world. And there's a lot of differences to how that's kind of evolved as we have, more and more channels and more interactions with more and more points of data. I think Mike touched on a little bit of this, but 56% of your customers are interacting across multiple touch points. And so how do you manage that information and then understand it, because the journey is what's really so important. It's not good enough anymore to look at those in one individual one-off events. It's really that holistic view that you have that decides if the customer is happy with you or not. And so that's what you have to think of is in terms of a business today. And then as an engineer, how do you handle this growing amount of touch points, all of these numerous endpoints, collection of that data and using that data. So it's a bit of an evolution really of a problem that we've had, and getting a holistic picture is really key today. So if we take a look at this, and what you'll probably have right now is a series of siloed systems. Mike is going to go a little bit deeper into the examples here. But just, this is all of the things and ways that in which a customer can interact with you. And the amount of problems that they can have at each one of these moments is really paramount. So being able to understand all of those and interact together to give them a holistic picture, whether it's on that website, on that interaction with your sales rep, whatever it might be, is really that next phase of it. And so today's Customer 360, to summarize really, is this single view of customer across those touch points, and taking those millions of moments and using that information to provide it a better experience in that moment of now, as we like to call it at DataStax. And by doing that, you're creating this contextual, real-time experience through an application or an interaction that's really right for that customer in that single moment, built off of the entire journey that they've had with you. So that's a good introduction, I think, for where Customer 360 is involved. I'm going to hand it back to Mike now, who is going to talk a little bit about why graph databases are really the right fit for that in today's world.
Okay, thank you, Gary. To illustrate that point, what we're going to do is we're going to start off by looking at how you might implement a Customer 360 solution without graph, and then highlight some of the advantages that you gain when you do look at graph technologies. If you were not going to use graph, you might select a traditional relational database system. Most likely, as we talked about, your customer data would be stored in multiple data locations or silos. These records may or may not be coupled. If they were coupled, it's very likely that they would be just loosely coupled. Most implementations that I've seen, it's very difficult to access all of the different records. And if you can get at them, it's even more difficult to relate them accurately to one another. This creates difficulty in viewing all of that information, that 360 view of a specific customer, or of how that customer experience progresses through some of your business processes. If you're also trying to look at specific time periods, it can be very difficult to view how your customer interactions have changed. If you want this information at your fingertips within a few seconds, as many Customer 360 applications require, you have a great deal of difficulty doing this with these data silos. Even if you changed the silos and created a data warehouse where you brought all those records under one roof, what you're doing there is you're duplicating the data, and maybe you're connecting it a little bit better, but you're just duplicating the technology. You're not adding any more significant capabilities to what you had when it was in silos, even though it may be a little bit better connected. Let's say you start to ask questions about your data. What if you wanted to know why customer complaints have gone up 10% in the last quarter, or why were 25% of your customer deliveries late last week for a particular region? Looking at just the data, even within the data warehouse, isn't going to help you answer some of those tough questions that graph can help you with. To get into the details, we're going to look at a customer journey of how someone may interact with your business. And believe it or not, this diagram is hopefully a typical interaction with your company. And when we look at these records, what we're doing is we're not just trying to look at what happened, we're trying to look at the connections between the records. And if we're looking at records and connections, we're conceptualizing our data as a graph. The individual records, they form the nodes, and those connections form the edges of the property graph. As I said, this image, even though it looks a bit complex, illustrates a typical customer purchase from a major retailer. So as we detail this throughout the presentation today, you'll see the information we can glean by conceptualizing things as a graph. Specifically today, we're going to talk about 4 benefits of using Graph for Customer 360. We're going to look at the ability to definitively connect all of your customer records, the benefits that Graph has for connecting records that have multiple connections between them, not just one foreign key or one loose connection. We're also going to look at specific algorithms from graph theory that may help with Customer 360. And then we're going to look specifically at the performance and scalability that's possible with DSD Graph. With relational systems or data warehouse, it's common to have difficulties, I said, knowing what records truly connect to a specific customer. With a graph, these clear connections become records and are a core characteristic of the underlying data store. Let's walk through this typical or standard use case where a customer wants to purchase a refrigerator from a national retailer. They may start off on the website looking at different products and reading reviews of those products. Now, at this stage, the customer is most likely not adding reviews, they're just viewing, but it's reasonable that your business may want to track the reviews that a customer is looking at or commenting on or even asking questions about. And using a graph, you can have these direct links from the customer records that you have to not just what they're purchasing, but the activities that they have within your system. So in this case, a customer browsing the website, looking at reviews, and then they select an item and actually place an order. And that order then has a delivery scheduled for it. If it's not at the local store already, there'll have to be some inventory management that happens behind the scenes. So as that order puts things in motion, it's going to affect your internal operations. Now a driver has to be scheduled to move that item from one location to another. A warehouse associate needs to work to manage inventory from both an accounting standpoint and from a physical location aspect. Now these behind-the-scenes activities, they may or may not affect your customer. They certainly will affect them indirectly. And the activities may affect your interactions with other customers. So it's very important to be able to store this information accurately. As it comes time to actually install the refrigerator, there's a third party involved, a handyman that will work to pick up the item, install it in location. These third party entities, they're outside of your organization, but if they're working with you, they affect your customer's perception of doing business with you. Now, if we were going to try to manage this with a relational system, going back to the example we had earlier, you'd be drawing, you'd have a number of tables with loosely connected records, and you'd be following difficult paths to try to do some of your internal processes, like scheduling those activities, notifying customers of a status change. Customers may also want to approach a store associate and check on the status of their order. They may call into your call center and say, my delivery needs to be rescheduled. All of these interactions need to be tracked. When they're calling that call center, they may have positive perception, they have a negative perception of how they're doing business with you. And if there's a negative perception, you want your call center associates to have the complete view of that customer at their fingertips. If they have to log into different systems or try to correlate data, there can be a lag, and it can be very difficult to try to piece together an accurate timeline on the fly of what this customer's been through. An employee that may be working hard to provide help to a customer, but if they're not able to do that, it reflects poorly on your business because they don't have all the information they need. I'm sure we've all had instances where we were on the phone with a customer service representative and we had to give our name or order number or address multiple times as a call attendant checked different systems. Maybe one set of information was needed for the order status system, another set of information was needed for the delivery system, or even worse, we probably had experiences where we were transferred from one call center associate to another, had to give our story or give our information all over again. this context switching and moving from system to system can have significant impact on the quality of service you're able to provide to customers and how your customers perceive doing business with you. Managing this information with a graph provides significant benefits. You have clear connections between all the records. You have clear entry points for sales associates or customer service representatives into the system to view the journey that your customer has been on. They can see all of the, not just the interactions, but the connections and the order with there. This provides significant benefit when trying to manage those customer records effectively. Something else that we see with many Customer 360 applications is the need to model Customer 360 records that connect to each other in multiple ways. Inherently, that's something that graphs are very good at, having multiple connections between those that have meaning. Oftentimes, when we attempt to model customer interactions with other technologies, you don't get those definitive links as we talked about, but you also don't get the full picture, because if there are multiple connections, you don't understand what each one might mean. With graph here, we see that in a typical customer relationship, we may, with a typical customer interaction for delivery, there may be multiple points that affect that delivery and movement from the item from the storage location to the delivery location. Each of those lines represents a different aspect of your business or business process. Now, each of these can affect your customers in the real world. Customers understand these connections because they're living them. If there's a delay in your supply chain, or there's a rescheduling because of the third-party associate that was going to install it, they see this inherently. By having these multiple connections mapped in your graph, your employees who may be trying to help them answer questions, provide better service, can also identify how these changes are influencing the customer's experience. One thing that's very powerful that is related to the multiple connected aspect of the graph is that when you store your data as a graph, you then have access to the underlying graph query language, which makes developing applications to navigate these complex connections between customer records straightforward and natural, because the software reflects how the users, the customers, think about the data, because again, it's how they're living through it. Once Customer 360 data is stored in the graph, it also allows for some very meaningful visualizations. These are some examples that we've taken from the Expero graph library. And you may have seen the typical star diagram that represents Customer 360 with the customer node in the center and all the interactions spread out around it. This can be a very helpful diagram for seeing all of your customer interactions, but it's only one way to visualize data. It might be helpful to view all of your interactions in a timeline, to see customer interactions in order for a specific time period. You may want to relate recent events to a long-term trend. You may want to highlight customers who have multiple sales or have complaints within a particular time period. Again, graph and the underlying technology for navigating the data makes these visualizations straightforward. And it's possible to do these visualizations even in real time. Another type of diagram which can be very helpful is a same key-based diagram that may illustrate how your customer moves, how your customer interactions move through your business processes. It may be beneficial to look not only at individual customer experiences, but to make aggregations that analyze impacts across segments of multiple users. Your users, your customers, they think you already know this. And so it's important for you to be able to have this accurate picture that reflects their perception of their process through your business and how they're interacting with you. Because graph definitively connects these records and accurately models these multiple connections, it allows you to create information from the data you have stored and allows you to use that information to focus on better serving your customers. Creating an accurate view of a customer's journey is challenging. Graph has some significant benefits because it naturally models those interactions and connections between the customer interactions. That accurate model can positively impact your ability to relate to customers and understand how they're interacting with your business. There are certain questions that you really cannot answer without graph. We've talked a bit already about the benefits of using graph for accurately representing your data, but an added bonus you get when modeling your information in a graph is that you can then apply graph theory and algorithms to your data to gain insights that you might never be able to achieve with a relational data, or specifically with data in relational silos. So the next few slides, we're going to look at a sample of some of the graph algorithms that can be beneficial for Customer 360. Clustering is finding closely related groups within your system. This can help you reason about different segments of your customer base in different ways. Analyzing different attributes of your customer allows you to create these segments. Maybe you want to look at commonalities in purchasing history or geographic location, or even a common patterns of visits between multiple locations. Identifying these attributes of customer segments and creating these clusters can help you better serve those members and differentiate the different segments of customers that you have. Network analysis is widely used in graphs in a number of fields, for everything from project planning to particle physics to mapping social trends on Facebook. But there can be applications within the Customer 360 realm as well. Studying the dependencies that you have on the different aspects of your business, understanding what factors influence customer satisfaction, or looking at the flow of items through your business can help you understand what your business capacities are. Understand at the macro level what your throughput could be. This may be done with a real-time look at your data, but this is also where you may use some of the analytical power of a graph. Within a graph database, you can model your data in one way and have access to those real-time queries that can give you information specifically about a particular customer, but also aggregate information and do analytical work over a whole set of data from your graph. Moving on to other analyses that are helpful from graph theory, collaborative filtering is one where having all elements of that customer interaction model in a graph helps make those connections between different areas of data. Connecting a purchase with a browsing history on a website, or matching records from reviews with preferences that the user has expressed. This can allow for more accurate recommendations for products, or a specific user may be interested in purchasing things that were bought by users within a similar area. Information gained through this type of graph analysis can really help with focused marketing efforts. Path similarity, it's a concept that's similar to clustering, but with path analysis, you're looking for specific shapes or patterns for the graph, not just properties or attributes of particular customers. You're looking at customers who have had similar experiences that you've gathered and modeled in your graph. These customers, then you can help interact with them in more effective ways. Now, you hope as a general pattern in your graph is that customers made an order, they received a delivery, there's no calls to your call center, no complaints lodged, and there's a positive review on your website. That's what you hope for. But if you can see similar patterns between folks that perhaps left a negative review, either about your business or particular products, maybe there's a higher percentage of negative reviews for folks that are dealing with one location. That can be a flag that identifying these patterns within your graph, identifying the sources of those patterns can help improve your business. Identifying graphs uses also pattern matching technology, which can yield valuable insights. Once you have your data matched in this graph, you can see the individual steps and the patterns that can then emerge. Graph theory has been around for a very long time. With technological advances like DSC graph, it allows us to model different types of data and employ graph theory. With these last few slides, we just scratched the surface of how they may apply, how that graph theory may apply to Customer 360 applications. When you are able to store your particular customer data in a graph, you can then bring in experts in mathematics or graph theory to then maximize the information you may pull from the graph of your customer interactions. The last benefit that we're going to talk about with using graph for Customer 360 is performance and scaling. Going back to our counterexample, if you were not using graph for Customer 360, you might be writing to a set of data silos or a particular data warehouse, and you're gathering information from multiple sources. Each of those touch points represents a different record. Those touch points can generate high write loads that can cause problems for traditional relational systems. You may have writes fighting your reads. If you are trying to collect all this data with the traditional system, it's likely that you may choke out some of your information. If you're trying to use mirrors to a data warehouse and use an ETL to move data from your specific silos into that warehouse, once again, you may experience throughput issues, may lose some interactions, or may be difficult to be able to retrieve the records that you need in a timely fashion. Well, with DSC Graph, you don't have these issues. Because of the scalability, because of the Cassandra backend that has a built-in replication, you're able to separate concerns if you need to between data centers. DSC Graph is purpose-built to handle the data throughput and the specific data capacities that you need for Customer 360 applications. DSC Graph's distributed architecture and scalability, they provide technological capabilities required for modern Customer 360 applications, providing both transactional queries to provide information in real time and analytical possibilities to give the results of graph theory benefits, all while keeping your customer data up to date. So this time I'm going to hand it back off to Garrett to talk a little bit more about Customer 360 with DSC Graph.
Perfect, thanks, Mike. And I think that gives everyone kind of a really good overview of why we're kind of moving on from relational systems when it comes to tools like these, and looking more at graph databases. And so when it comes to graph databases, though, where does DataStax Enterprise Graph fit into the world? So it's really the most scalable graph database out there, which is pretty awesome and neat and pretty critical, as we'll get to, for Customer 360 that's based around your whole company. And it's designed for those real-time use cases, so powering the recommendations, the fraud detection, that network analysis, the moments that you need in real time, and to serve those back up to your end user in real time. And then managing that complex, highly connected data, really built on those relationships of that data, crucial for graph databases and why we have it as part of our multi-model platform at DataStax Enterprise. And I'm excited for a few things when it comes to graph and why it's so great for C360. So just wanted to quickly hit on each of these. It starts with really the flexibility. We went over kind of the questions that people need answered and can really only be answered with graph, which is pretty cool and something that's new with this world of graph. Scale for when those user grows, that touch points grow, all of that stuff. How can you manage that reliably in a system? And lastly, that insight for when your app needs that new functionality, you need that next level thing for your support team or whatever it may be. Having the ability to really build that pretty quickly are three areas that we really shine on. And so when it comes to flexibility, it's all about this changing data model that you'll probably see with a 360 solution. As your company relies more on Customer 360 and getting that view of the customer, you're constantly going to be adding different interactions, different data points, all of those things to your data model. So something that, might not be so fun with a relational system or Cassandra is really perfect for DataStax Enterprise Graph. And being able to constantly change that on the fly, adapt that model, build off of it, very easy to do with a very expressive gremlin query language. This is just a simple traversal that we have here, but there's, many, many more traversals and types that you can play with. That you'll be able to manipulate that data however you need to support those end users and those use cases that you have. So flexibility, number one thing. Moving on to scale. And so scale, Mike, alluded to this, and we talk about it often at DataStax, but it's really because of that best distribution of Apache Cassandra that we're powered by. And that's been proven over time really to scale, that linear scale performance that Netflix has a great blog post on, the ability to have that, be able to provide a very consistent performance no matter the number of nodes you have over time, critical for these customer-facing C360 applications where you're relying on it so much as a business. And the cool thing I think about with DataStax Enterprise Graph is the gremlin query language is really designed within DSC Graph So you don't have to get into those Cassandra tables as much as you might think. So you can learn Gremlin, get started with that, and it's all going to be built behind the scenes into Cassandra tables for you. So some really powerful scale, availability, distribution, all those good things that come with Cassandra without some of the complexity. And then furthermore, as we look to building on that part of DataStax Enterprise, it's that insight from a comprehensive data platform. So the ability to run analytics with that, do some fuzzy search now in DataStax Enterprise 5.1, which is coming out later this month. Having those complete tools at your arsenal to build those type of applications that you need and support those end use cases. All in one system, none of that ETL business, being able to very easily manage it and corral that data to use it in real time to provide that end user the experience that they're looking for. So you may have all of these different mobile devices that people are using these days. You may have multiple touch points that people are coming to you with. And the ability to scale that, to make sure that's reliable, to connect those dots that the user has with you as a relationship. All in one system is a pretty powerful and unique offering with DataStax Enterprise. I'd love to invite you guys to get started with DSE Graph. For those that like to kind of get hands-on, we have some great graph examples on GitHub, things like killer video with a video data model. And it's really as simple as downloading DSE, Studio, which is our developer tool, and then Graph Loader, which is a way to get that information into Graph. And then really having at it and exploring it. Studio is a wonderful tool for not only development, but graph analysis and the ability to, use that information and learn from that is so critical. And then next, if you're more of the, let me understand this fully and then dive in, we have our friends at DataStax Academy, which do a great job with free online training. DataStax Enterprise Graph is a full 29-unit course that we invite you to take. Some really good content and information there. You'll learn Gremlin, the different types of traversals, how you might deploy this thing. Some really good stuff there. And so finally, to summarize, I think it's important to understand from the business side of things, we're going to start to think of customer experience as these journeys across every single touch point. And so as engineers, our challenges then become a few of these questions that we need to ask ourselves and be ready to answer over time. How are we managing the complexity of these relationships with increasingly different questions being asked, different business units relying on that information, and relying on it in real time in a contextual way? How do we handle the scale of managing those increasing number of touch points, right? This is a non-trivial thing. With all of those touch points, they need to always work, always be on and reliable for the business. And then lastly, how do we use that data in real time? How do we use the analytics, the search, all of that functionality that people might need that are on that customer support side of the house, sales, whatever it may be? How do we get their information to them the way that they need it to be able to make the most impact? So some good questions to think about there. And graph databases and DataStax Enterprise Graph in particular is really well suited to handle all three of those. And so with that, I'd like to wrap it up, hand this back to Erica, and we'll see if you guys have any questions and answers for us.
Thanks, Garrett. Thanks, Mike. So we still have quite some time for Q&A, so if you have any questions, feel free to type them in the Q&A box, or the chat window, actually. We're getting some over there. But we did get a couple of questions. I will read some over to you, Garrett. I think most of them are for you. First one is, Cassandra is not a native graph database. What do you mean by DSE Graph is the most scalable graph DB? Can you elaborate more on that?
Yeah, of course. Happy to answer that. So it's really because it's built on top of Apache Cassandra, you have that really solid foundation and the ability to, not have to manage those two separate systems is really what we mean by scalable. So, billions of objects, the ability to scale that out is really unique to DataStax's enterprise graph in the market with Cassandra.
Thanks. So let's see. How does the performance and scalability compare to AringoDB? If you have.
Do you happen to have any insight there, Mike? I'm not that familiar with Aringo, to be honest.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, I'm not that familiar either. I don't know specific comparisons to make, sorry.
Yeah, no problem there. I can follow up with some teams there and internally and see if we can have a better answer for you, though.
Okay. And another one, how do you address the fact that Cassandra isn't ACID compliant?
Yeah, that's a good question. You know, that's really all about understanding the use cases and the questions that you want answered. So having that data model up front and understanding eventually consistency and the ability to support multiple data centers, you know, you're losing some of that compliance even in a relational system. Anything you want to add to that, Mike, more on the development side of things?
No, I think you handled that question well in terms of just the mindset you have to have. You do have to approach your applications understanding that there's eventual consistency, not immediate consistency. That's one of the more significant ones. But again, that goes to the underlying systems that you're working with and just having that mindset as you begin developing applications. Yeah,
and it's really all about trade-offs, you know, as you rely more on availability or things like that, you know, what are the trade-offs that you're having for it, and can you deal with a lack of consistency for that, you know, 100% uptime, if you will?
Awesome. We have a good question here. Says, my main challenge is how to keep graph visualization simple and intuitive for users. Does DataStax have good UI interface to render network easily searchable?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think that Mike can actually best answer that because that's where really Expero comes into play.
Yeah, thank you, Gary. This is an area where Expero has put a great deal of thought and effort into, and unfortunately there's no silver bullet that is an answer for all situations, but because graph databases can be so complex or large, it can be very difficult to make meaningful visualizations of that. Again, I can point you back to our Expero graph library. There's a link in the presentation. You can see those slides. There's a number of specific examples that are tailored towards different industries or different information you're trying to get from your data. I would encourage you to look at those, draw ideas, or contact us if you want us to take a look at specific problems you're having. But because of the different nature of graph, it does take a different way of thinking through it. And you want to make sure that you're not overwhelming users with information. That's one of the more common problems when trying to create visualizations, is you want to allow the user to actually get information out of what they're seeing. And that means applying some different techniques than you would to other ways of storing data.
And I see a few more interesting questions here. A couple high-level ones, you know, what is Expero and DataStax? Are they different? A good question. DataStax is really the technology behind that power, and then Expero is one of our great partners, especially in the graph space that helps implement that from really, you know, conception to all the way. And then let's see what else here. Does your graph database provide API driver to allow BI tool to access data such from Tableau and MicroStrategy tools? So this is a good question. What I think you'll be most interested in here is our DSE analytics. So we have an integration with, it's really Apache Spark there that you'll be working with. And so the ability with DSE graph frames that comes from an update with Spark in 2.0, to be able to not only take your Cassandra data, but also your graph data and be able to, you know, throw that into a BI tool and do some SQL analysis with that pretty easily. Again, that's really coming with 5.1, which comes out later this month, so be sure to keep an eye out for that one. And Stephen, if we can get a copy of the presentation slide deck, yes, you absolutely can. We'll be following up with this webinar with all of the slides, all of the recordings. You'll have all of that in your hands, don't worry.
Yep. And Garrett, do you see anything else that you want to address now? Or I know we've got a lot of questions, so we'll try to get them answered to you individually offline.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's just a few that fit into learning more about graph databases, which I really recommend. Right. Our course, again, it's a DataStax Academy course. Just go to academy.datastax.com, and then you'll go to our courses, and in there they talk a really good level about kind of the use case and applications that you might provide graphs for, the ability to start to use that in a really friendly way. So definitely recommend that, and I think that's about it. Anything else you want to add, Mike?
No, nothing else from me. Thank you.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for your time.
Yeah. Thank you, Mike, Garrick. So if you guys have any other questions, feel free to email us at those emails on the slide you see there. And yeah, on behalf of Mike, Garrick, and the rest of the team here at DataStax and Expero, thanks for joining us today.